This video is partially a video response to a series of small posts or events that have been going on throughout the brigade, and it's partially by requests. I've been having a lot of game discussions with Ivan of Ivan Mike 1968, who has been producing a lot of videos and stirring up a lot of great conversation, as I've mentioned in the past. So this video is mostly about language, which I guess is not really a surprise on this channel, but I'm not sure what good it will do. I'm not sure how far it will spread, but just as a record or something that if these topics cycle through the brigade again, maybe possibly used as a resource, at least something where I can link and say, well, if you care what my 2 cents are, here they are, recorded for posterity on YouTube. So what this video is specifically about is GM Fiat, and it will tie into, by necessity, another look at player agency. So I think the first thing to talk about in regard to GM Fiat is that throughout the hobby, I guess, if you go to forums where it comes up or listen to videos, you're going to hear the term GM Fiat used as a pejorative, used to describe something negatively, something to avoid, get rid of, not allow in. If your game enables your game master to do it, it's kind of a weird way to think about it, then you should stop playing that game. You're going to hear a lot of negativity about GM Fiat. And that makes sense, because as a topic, it's really only a problem when it's a problem. So the really only reason to talk about it is when you're having difficulty with it. So of course, that's going to be negative. But as new players come into the hobby and they hear GM Fiat, they come to think of it as negative. And this is unfortunately not actually what it is. It's much more neutral than that. So we have, as an entire hobby, imported an attitude of people who are specifically focused on the problems which can arise from GM Fiat. We've imported them into all games, which doesn't make any sense. It doesn't follow logically. So let's start with what Fiat actually means. Direct translation from the original root is "let it be so," right? So it's Picard. Make it so. It's the decision by someone in authority for something to happen. In any context. In terms of role-playing, this is someone who is empowered to make a decision, making a decision. And the specific feeling behind it is that they are making that decision within their own purview. They're not relying on a set of rules or something, not looking up a result in a chart. They have a situation, it needs a resolution. They have an understanding of how the game works and how their culture of play works, and they make that decision. Boom, it's done. This is what it shall be. This is how we shall handle it. Right. So Fiat has over time evolved to include 2 perspectives on decision making. One is that it's this authority figure making a final decision on something and enforcing it with their authority, nothing else. And it has evolved to include the sense that this is an arbitrary decision. So, in any game where the second definition crops up, what we're really talking about is a problem. If the person empowered in that moment to make some kind of decision is doing it arbitrarily, then the chances are that this game will in some way be flawed. But if we're talking about the first situation where the person empowered to make a decision makes a decision, then things are working as they should. It's not something to complain about. It's something to praise and develop. Let's roll things back. When the hobby started, rules were hard for the young kids who would be the ones who would pick them up to understand. We were impatient to play, and you could learn enough about how play worked from skimming the rules, or just kind of dipping into character creation and a little bit of combat in the basic sets, and then just going for it. And then when you encountered situations, you would be faced with, well, do we flip through these thin books and look for the thing that's going to help us out? Or are we going to trust the person who's running the game to make a good decision? Or are we going to collaboratively decide how we're going to handle it as a group from here on out? Because we know there's no answer in the book. And this was a common situation. There was no answer in the book. And articles in Dragon Magazine, for example, would come out and talk about how people handle certain things like jumping distance and different ways to handle grappling or traps and whatnot. Right? As a hobby, you were exposing yourself to these ideas. You're having conversations with other game masters and figuring out what's a good way to handle things. But at the end of the day, you were left having to make a decision on your own if that situation happened in your game. This is GM Fiat. We are going to handle it this way. Right. So if the game master is the most experienced person in the room, if it's the game master's game, which maybe doesn't happen as much anymore, then they are the ones that we are trusting. We as the players are trusting to make a good decision to keep the game fun. They have the perspective over the rules and the unfolding situation that we as players who are, at the character's eye view may not recognize. Etc., etc. There are situations where the game master needs to make a decision. It could be something as simple as you have 3 people in your group, a game master and 2 players. The 2 players don't agree. The game master has to decide. It could be something as simple as that. This is GM Fiat. This is not a bad thing. And in certain older games, almost the only way for the game master to experience play in a similar fashion to what the players can do is this very ability to make rulings in the absence of rules, or to adjust rules that aren't working for the group. This is GM Fiat. This is not the GM Fiat, which is a problem. The GM Fiat, which is a problem, is to sit down in a GM-less game and take over, and then start making decisions willy-nilly. This is to, in Fantasy Flight games, Star Wars, which we talk about a lot, is to narrate all the dice results, even though it's explicitly laid out that the players narrate the positive results in conjunction with the game master, who's responsible for the scene, and the game master is responsible for the negative results. Right? You have a die pool which produces positive and negative results, some of which cancel out, some of which remain. Right? And it's a collaboration over the resulting dice. If the game master hogs all of that, if they take all of the narrative authority for themselves in a particular scene because they have an idea of what's going to be great right now, they're reacting to their vision of how the scene should play out and ignoring the input from the players. This is the GM Fiat, which is a problem. A game master who has run the game normally for many, many sessions, maybe months or years, and then one night gets frustrated and changes something which has always been so, changes the power of an NPC, changes the challenge represented by a creature or a trap or a situation, just changes it to suit their mood. This is the GM Fiat, which is a problem. This is arbitrary. It really isn't tied to the game. If you have a person who will do that, they will do that in any game. Now, some of the players might object, which is where arguments come from. Some of them might just, well, let's just ride through it. Some of them might have a lot of experience playing and know that, hey, we don't interrupt the session. We talk about it afterward. But then, of course, it never comes up for some groups who don't like conflict, and on and on. This can fester into this hatred of when GMs make changes, even if that arbitrary change turned out to be a whole lot of fun for everybody in the moment. Now, is GM Fiat always bad? I hope I have shown that GM Fiat is oftentimes necessary in some games for them to flow properly at all. In other more collaborative games, it doesn't really come up unless the person in that position is a problem. And it's the person you need to deal with. You can't rule them into submission. They have to learn to understand that what they are doing is wrong. Why is it wrong? When someone arbitrarily alters the state of play to suit their whim, their mood, their vision in the moment, without thought about the rest of the game or the players in it, this removes agency. Another popular term. What does it remove? It removes the capacity for choice from others. The good kind of GM Fiat, in a sense, in these games, is making a ruling in the absence of a rule. And the person who has to live with it is the game master. They have the right to decide in an awful lot of games. But when it's not that situation, I am removing the ability to decide in some way. And that's all agency is. Agency is the player's ability to make decisions within the context of that game. Sometimes they will have a greater degree of agency. They're able to do more things as a character and as a player. Right? They can decide what their character does or how their character thinks or how their character feels, but they can also in some way alter the narrative positively or negatively. Some games, they can only decide what their character does. There are some games which inform you through mechanics how your character feels or what kind of moral quandary they're in. There are some games where there's no GM, and the scene, the setting, the events, the interactions, and how the characters think and feel and what they do are all decided in a form of consensus or a passing of the torch around the table. There are so many different types of games. GM Fiat is interfering with the ability to decide when it is this arbitrary second definition. Player agency is not one thing. Player agency is a scale, a spectrum. You will have varying amounts of it depending on which game you're playing. Learn what they are, and you will stop being annoyed when you feel like you don't have enough. Right? If you know that you are being restricted from the amount you should have in that game, get annoyed. If you have extra, celebrate if you like it. But there are people out there who want less agency and not more, and we have to understand them too. They're a part of the hobby too. Player agency is a spectrum of choices defined by the game and the group. GM Fiat is this two-headed beast, a necessity in some games and a problem in the GM in the other. I hope this has been in some way helpful. It's probably too long. If you've made it through the end, thanks for listening.